Hi, everybody, and this is Europhile Live. And today we are, first of all, hello, to everyone, and hi, Maddie. And I'd like to introduce everyone, to Dietmar Pichler. Hello, Dietmar. How are you?
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
Oh, no problem, no problem. Actually, it's our honor, that you've come and spoke, to speak with us, today. Just by way of introduction, everybody, Dietmar is a disinformation analyst, but he's also a resilience strategist, editor in chief of InVed Insights, which is published by the Institute for the Defense of European Democracies. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dietmar, the institute itself. What is your position there? I didn't look at it because we're friends.
My
We know.
position It's very interesting. So I speak very openly. Today I had a discussion with the head of the institution, with the president. I said I would prefer head editor, not head of research. I'm not a scientist. And he said, "Yeah, but scientist, this is you do so much research." And I said, "No, it's editor. It's journalism. What we do, or it's research. It's very difficult to say. But the official position is head editor and a chief analyst."
Okay, perfect, perfect. Thanks for that. And in fact, the reason why I wanted Dietmar to come and speak with Maddie and I and everybody else is because there are countries that we don't pay attention to. One of those is Austria, that we know very little about and of what is going on inside, especially during this period. Okay. As we all know, Austria is not in NATO itself, it's neutral. And Dietmar, you're going to be talking about, that position itself. But before we get to that, can you tell us a little bit about what is going on now politically? What is the makeup, of the government? And anything else that you want to add to give the proper context for going on into our discussion?
Yeah, well, so thanks again. Yeah, to put some attention to Austria, it's not the biggest country and not the most important country, but it's a member of the European Union, so we cannot ignore Austria. I mean, I would ignore it if it would be not a member of the European Union, but regarding its position also, Austria borders to Hungary and Slovakia, and we heard a lot about what is going on there. They have quite Russian friendly governments and they have a lot of Euroscepticism now. And we also have it, maybe not to that extent, and we are neutral military wise, which means we are allowed to have an opinion. We can judge, we can um, condemn a full scale invasion by the Russian Federation, for instance, but we are not allowed to have foreign military bases and we're not allowed to there
Hmm.
is there are certain limitations on our military activities. Yeah? We can participate in peace missions like we do in Kosovo, for instance. So there's a lot we can do. And then we have a neutrality movement in our country. This is
Hmm.
far right and the far left are participating in this. And of course, they advocate that our neutrality has to be more. It has to be neutrality also in the political way. We should not have an opinion when Russia invades Ukraine, for instance. We should not have an
Hmm.
opinion. China, Taiwan, and all this stuff. And about the government, we have a quite pro Western government at the moment for Austrian standards. There are the conservatives and the social democrats and the liberals, and the liberals have the foreign ministry, and our foreign minister, she was recently in Kiev. President Zelensky did Austria. There were some protests by the usual suspects. So I cannot argue about the government itself and their positions. It's for Austrian standards, like I said, quite clear and not anti-Western or pro-Russian like we had in the past.
Yeah.
But there are two things that are very important to say. We do not counter Russian influence, disinformation, all by more than not only about Russia, also Chinese and all these
Mm,
anti-Western
mm,
campaigns that we are facing. This is one problem that we have. And also, the new government needs to start doing something because they are already 100 days and I'm waiting. I'm eager to help, but I don't see a lot of change. So they work good, they do good things, but they don't explain them. It's like in PR, they say
mm,
do good things and speak about them. They don't do it. And this is a strategic communication. We have a lack of strategic communication. We should use this word more often, by the way. And
Yeah.
then we have an issue that the government, it was not so clear that we have this government. The far right was in the lead. So the FPÖ, it's a right wing populist and
Hmm.
Russian friendly Eurosceptic party. They were in the lead. And if we have more change, then we can have them in the government. They can have the federal chancellery, they can have foreign ministry, and we all had all this. At least the foreign ministry, but we didn't have a far right chancellor. So this is what we can face. And you know that with Hungary and Slovakia close to us, this is a very
Yeah.
dangerous situation for Europe.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's right there, well, it's not smack dab in the middle, but it's in the middle of Europa, right? So this is also within, let's say, reach of all of the connectivity trading routes and everything, which is important, right? You were talking about, just out of curiosity, you were talking about also, you're seeing Chinese, okay, infiltration as well. Do you have anything on that or not?
Yeah, I have a lot about that. It's so funny. We should talk more about that as
Yeah.
well. They do it in, I mean, the funny thing about the Chinese propaganda, you can tell, is it more overt or is it more subtle? On one hand, they have this Chinesische Volkszeitung, which is the German
Hmm.
of the Chinese peoples. It's official propaganda and it looks like in the good old Cold War days. So it's, they use
Wow.
all these paintings and they publish it on Facebook, and we also see it here in Austria and in Germany, of course. On the other hand, they work more subtle with all these friendship associations. I'm not
Yeah.
sure how many of them we have. Maybe we have
Hmm.
10 of them, and they are very
Really?
powerful people participating in their. Recently, we had a former German minister here who has a quite clear position if it's about Russia, but suddenly, if it's about China, he's a kind of, I don't want to call him agent of influence, but let's say
Mhm.
a PR guy. Yeah. And what I saw a video where they present their friendship associations and there are some stakeholders, and there was a surprise guest. Don't want to mention his name now, but he was a
Yeah.
former journalist from the United States who lives in Vienna. And yeah, but he's not a journalist for the United States anymore because he writes for China. He writes for Chinese state media, and
Yeah.
he also lobbies for the Silk Road Initiative. And then you know where it goes, and what this is about. And I very often see this person at events, also events from the American Embassy or events from the European Union. He shows up, and we don't know. Is he there for the wine? Is he there to gather information? Maybe it's a mix,
Mm.
but it's how Vienna works. It's all
Yeah.
about coming together, and there is a lot of tolerance for such people. And what concerns me more, it's a lack of awareness. We do not
Mm.
see that we have a problem with individuals, with actors. We see it, all this infiltration or disinformation and foreign
Yeah.
interference, we see it as a cyber, limited to the cyber world. Some trolls, they are far away. They're maybe in China, maybe in Russia, maybe in Africa, but it doesn't really concern us. And this is the problem, but it's not only an Austrian problem.
No, 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 I agree with you 100% because we're getting the same thing here. We'll talk about something in a bit. I just wanted to sort of ask you some other questions also about the Austrian context. We have the same problem here in Italy. Okay, it's not taken seriously, sort of looked at as, oh, funny memes and things like that, but there is no real impact. It would have to. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on underneath, but we'll get to that in a bit. And in fact, I'm surprised because Vienna is known as the spy capital of Europe, right? It was during Cold
It's the old
War.
Soviet connection, right? Because back in the days, you used to have NATO on one side and the Warsaw Pact on the other side. So it picked up from there and just continued from there. But in the 90s and 2000s, it got even worse because many Russian and even Kazakh corrupt officials ended up fleeing to Vienna. So on top of
Yeah.
actual spies, you get the corrupt money. So is it still the case that uh, all the oligarchs were ex-government officials who fled before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine still spend their time in Vienna and have all their money there? Uh, do you see any connection whether they're actually actively involved in promoting Russia's interests?
I'm sure it's still the case. Yeah, so it is the case. The spy capital, and it's also a place where agents of influence maybe used Vienna as a kind of hub. But we have competition now because the United Arabs they joined BRICS, and Dubai is now a very important city for money laundering and for paying
Mm,
pro-Russian assets. Yeah, so I think maybe this is. One of the reasons Vienna is not so important anymore, but still, yeah, it's the door to Europe. We have a very tolerant view on that. Spying on others is not forbidden. Only spying on Austria. So that means that the Americans, if they spy on Russians or vice versa, this is not an issue at all. And yeah, so and we have all these, I don't want to mention the names, but we have a
yeah.
lot of individuals here who have their money here, who fled, also pro-Russian Ukrainians we have from the old government. So there are a lot of
Mm,
problems that are still not solved. And the Ukrainians recently, President Zelensky, he also said very careful, but he reminded us that we have some shady people here from Ukraine, but the media, they or some commentators, they understood it wrong. They thought it's people who fled from the war, potential soldiers, but it was not about that at all. It was about all these people who came here to hide their money, stolen money, and also to continue their political lobbying in favor of Moscow.
wow. Okay. And in terms, Dietmar, of the population itself, right? Austrians, there must be some polling of what they think of the war in Ukraine and how if they support Russia or not. Do you how can you just describe that a little bit? And also, do you think there's also a generational divide amongst, let's say, people who are more pro-Western and those who are still, um, still supporting Russia?
Every day I think about this and the results, what we have in the service, they are so contradicting. Yeah, maybe you had
Mhm.
also such experiences that you don't see a real pattern. What I can tell you is, of course, we have the peace movement and people who were in the old peace movement against the Pershing II rockets, so in favor of the Soviet Union. They are older now. They are 60 plus because they were young teenagers or students during the early 80s. So this is what we have.
Mm,
It's not maybe not the biggest group, then we have the far right. They are in all generations. We have a real survey about how we are ready to defend ourselves and about NATO and about neutrality. And there we saw that especially the young generation is very much in favor of neutrality and for peace and against getting ready to be able to defend ourselves. Yeah, because there is a certain propaganda campaign not only in Austria but also in Germany that we are getting ready for war. Yeah, and we are all warmongers, but actually it's about being ready not to go to war because you're able to defend yourself, and for the attacker it's not very attractive to
yeah.
attack a strong country. We saw it in Ukraine. Russia attacked when they thought they are weak enough. So, but we have the young generation is not really ready to defend, and I think it's
Mm,
also because of the education system. It's very left leaning, very pacifist, very pro
mm,
neutrality. And then we have the old generation who is very nostalgic about a time when our neutrality meant a lot.
mm,
We had this good economic development during the 70s and early
mm,
80s, this era. So there are, and maybe in the middle, the people are a little bit more realistic about the situation. But I know one thing for certain. We have one survey that shows something for certain that I think less than 30% of Austrians think that NATO is responsible or partly
okay.
responsible that Russia attacked. So it's not
Okay.
50% or something. But I
Yeah.
can tell you thing about the parties, and there is one thing about the service that is, I think, interesting. When we speak about the Social Democrats, they have a huge amount of unfortunately when you speak about the people who are active in the party,
Yeah.
politicians, they have a huge amount of peaceniks, yeah, old peace
Yeah.
movement neutrality
Got it.
people, not really pro-Western people, and their voters are not like that at all, and we know it from even two surveys. So I think there is that must be correct, that the voters are completely normal and realistic people and do not believe in that. So they think they do something for their voters, but the voters don't agree. But we see a clear pattern in the people who vote for the Communist Party and in the people
Mm.
who vote for the far-right FPÖ. And the Communist
Mm.
Party is not in the parliament. They have only 3%, and there are some
Mm.
other small groups, but they are growing. They are growing, and we
Mm.
know their ideology.
Yeah. Are
Speaking,
you seeing? So you're talking about? Oh, sorry, Maddie. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
Just to finish off, to wrap up this little bit about the little parties and things like that. Are you seeing, Dietmar, let's say the proliferation of these little micro parties, university students who are getting, let's say, brought into these parties?
Yes, I think I say this since 20 years, or at least since it's 12 years, especially since 2014. People say, okay, they are not in the parliament, so they are irrelevant. I
Right.
don't agree. Because if you have a movement and they have a couple of thousands of voters and they are really engaged and they really care, it's a movement. I mean, if I have an NGO and I have 50 members, it's quite huge for Austrian standards. So you say, oh wow,
Mhm.
it's very respectful. But if you have a party and you have 5,000 voters, you're very close to them and you can do a lot of activism. Maybe not
Yeah.
politics. Maybe you cannot form a government or something, but it's not only about that. So regarding propaganda, regarding ideology, and regarding subversion, these parties are relevant. I totally agree also with your analysis
Hmm.
regarding Italy. They are
Hmm.
relevant.
Hmm.
They play a role and they have a very long tradition, and they can say we are more than an NGO, we are real politicians, even if they are not part of the parliament. And I would add, for instance, I was recently on X attacked by a guy who is part of the
Hmm.
list Gaza list, one small
Hmm.
micro party that is
Yeah.
created only because of that, but they are also anti-Western, anti-NATO, and he wanted to educate me that the West is responsible for the invasion of Ukraine and some things like that. Then.
Okay. Yeah. In fact, the micro parties here serve as a different functions. But the two that come to mind, one is to keep all these narratives alive in the press. They get a lot of press on Insta, they're all over social media. There's a little bit, let's say, a very small protest somewhere, and the media is all over them. So they're given their, they weigh more than what they actually do in terms of political leverage, but they also serve as an operational base for a lot of different kinds of things that need to be done on the ground level, okay, in certain places like universities or associations and different things like that. Maria, I cut you off before. What did you
Oh,
want to ask?
it was a question related to NATO, actually.
Hmm.
We recently saw a slight change in the narrative surrounding NATO after the recent summit in The Hague, where many nations, except for one, committed to a 5% defense and infrastructure budget. And the shift in the narrative for specifically for NATO members was that among the pro-Russian parties was that NATO is trying to rob our future by dedicating money to defense. Was there a shift in Austria in relation to the summits in The Hague?
Yeah, well, as we are not a part of NATO, it's of course a little bit a different discourse. But what I see, unfortunately, there is no change in our perception of NATO. Yeah, so it's very negative. We have a majority
Well,
against NATO. We have, I think, between 70 or 80% who are against NATO membership. So this is
wow.
really huge, and we have a campaign going on, the demonization of NATO. So for instance, our foreign minister, only because she is a little bit pro-Western for Austrian standard, people call her NATO Beate. Yeah, so this is a slur. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
something you call somebody. Yeah, it's like asshole or something. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
So it's this is the image NATO has in Austria. So if you say something that, for instance, NATO is not responsible for the full scale invasion, then you say no matter what you think about NATO, but they are not. So you have to distance yourself all the time from NATO. It's like a boogeyman here. It's really crazy. And I always say it doesn't matter if we join NATO or not. This is not the main problem. The main problem is the way our perception of NATO and the way we demonize it, like it's North Korea or the axis of evil or something. It's completely ridiculous.
That's crazy. Well, it's
Wow.
not crazy. Here, there's a party. You know, Dietmar, the whole the 5 Star Movement, right? That is headed by a former PM, okay, Giuseppe Conte, and they did a whole campaign. We talked about this, Dietmar. He did a whole campaign, right, on that was to delegitimize NATO, and also to basically make sure that we just don't get enough armaments either to Ukraine or to defend ourselves. So it was a huge campaign. It started in April, and they carried it forward just before the summit. Actually, they had an event during the summit, okay, the NATO summit itself, and we talked about this also in our conversation, right, on your podcast. I wanted to ask you about: are there any Russian outlets being published in Austria that are geared towards, let's say, the Russian diaspora or no other people?
The Russian diaspora, they have their networks where they organize their 9th of May celebrations, but it's nothing compared to what is going on in Berlin. So we don't
Mm,
have the attacks, we don't have the scale of attacks on Ukrainians, for
mm,
instance. We have Russians here because Vienna is a big city, but I always explain the difference between Germany and Austria. There's a lot of things we have, but we don't have Russian Austrians, yeah, like Russland, Deutsche. We don't have it.
mm.
So the Russians we have here, they cause problems sometimes. They attack people, Ukrainians, and they are getting louder, unfortunately, but they are not as many as in Berlin. The situation in Berlin is really terrible. I know a lot of people there. They get attacked, they get intimidated.
Yeah,
I think the government there needs to do something about that because there are just still many. There are still more than the Ukrainians, maybe, in the whole country, and they feel it. Really feel
wow.
it.
Yeah, yeah, there, in fact. Maddie, did you want to add something to this?
Uh, no. Uh,
Okay.
yeah,
No, I
it's
can
just
go forward then. That's fine. No, I was just wondering whether you had a question about it.
Just want to add to your
Yeah.
question, Russian outlets we don't have, but for instance, the Russian ambassador, he is
Mm,
able to publish in a left-wing media, yeah, called International. It's a very left-wing, but also
mm-hmm.
connected to social democrats, and he's able to publish his commentary, his pro-Russian and anti-Ukrainian commentary there. And there is also another newspaper aimed at Generation 60 plus, where he's invited to interviews where the guy who interviews him, the questions are even worse than the answers. So it's really a problem that
Yeah. Mm,
they able still to place their narratives, but I'm more worried about the subtle narratives on the other hand, yeah,
yeah.
because this propaganda everybody understands. If it's the ambassador, they don't take him serious so much anyway in general, but you should still not platform these people on that way.
Yeah. Speaking of which, about the subtle, right? The subtle propaganda, the soft power that we don't look at it as that way, but it is. How about Dietmar? Because what's happening here, there's one case, right, that I wanted to talk a little bit about. Then maybe think about other things that are happening also in Austria in terms of either art exhibitions, music concerts, anything that involves the public that shows Russia, right, in a positive way, or at least connects on a cultural level. As we know, right, the Russians use, okay, culture in this way. Um, there's a case that's going on in Italy right now, and it's to do with a Russian orchestra conductor, okay, Gergiev, and he's supposed to be doing a concert in Caserta, and the governor, after the governor, all the information had come out about this guy. He's been sanctioned, okay, by the UK, by Canada, by the US. and he's been sanctioned by them, but he's still able to do concerts. Okay, he's going to be after Italy. Apparently, he's going to be going to Spain because he's got a Dutch passport. Okay, now there's a little more to him that meets the eye. I mean, he's it's a famous person. There's a great article that came out today by Max Kocha. If you go onto my feed on X, you'll find it because he went in and he did a deep dive and he's doing more investigation. Okay, on him because the conductor himself, he's running an actual system, okay, all through Italy. And what we're talking about here is that there's asset concealment, financial triangulation. He's got the cultural, let's say he projects Russian culture, okay, right into Europe, all right, right into the European Union. And this culture is about imperialism, okay, as well. He's located in Italy. He's got the whole system that he's built up between Rome, Venice, Milano, and Amalfi. And as Max, okay, has written, culture is used as a screen and art as a strategic vector to launder capital, move funds, and finance Russian propaganda under, okay, the reassuring guise of music, okay. Now, connected to him, there's a numerous amount of companies that now have been open in Italy, and he's got registered frontmen, all right, that are running them, and they are actually invisible. They've tried to get tax records, but they haven't been able to get those. And they manage real estate assets that are worth over 100 million euro. This is what we're talking about. Okay, a little conductor. Okay, what the way that he's been, billed. He's got a huge estate in Massa Lubrense, which is managed by a company called Commercio Edilizio SRL. But there are dozens of companies that are connected, okay, to this entity that I've just mentioned: real estate, culture, music, artistic representation, and logistics. Now, these companies basically are linked to Russian foundations, associations, cultural centers in Italy. And they're used, the funds that are generated are all used, okay, to finance Russian cultural propaganda. And therefore, they're producing in the festivals, publications, study centers. They're supposed to be independent academics, for example, but they're not. They're getting paid, okay, all through this. What is absolutely unbelievable to me right now is that the governor of Campania, okay, Vincenzo De Luca, is still allowing the concert to go forward, even with all the information that he's been given. I'm sure that the Italian intelligence services have also, okay, provided information about this. So this is basically Italian funds, because the actual uh, region is paying for this concert, or part of it, is being used to disseminate Russian soft power and advance all of their goals, okay, in Europe. So this is extremely disturbing to me. That's why I brought it up, because I said, and speaking with you about in Austria, you've seen the same thing in Vienna. Are they doing concerts and this kind of thing? Have you run into this kind of thing?
So I'm very careful to go into details because the embassy recently said we're going to sue anybody who basically
Wow.
says the truth about
Okay, so no
all
details.
these, all these proxies, all the proxy organizations that are involved. Isn't it nice? Yeah. So if we
Yeah.
cannot follow it. Yeah. I mean, they always say follow the money. Yeah. But it's very difficult to
Okay.
follow the money if there are so many organizations. And we need to understand that also the agents of influence, they are paid in many cases by proxies of the Kremlin. Yeah. They have their agencies and they have a lot of companies in between. Sometimes also local companies. Sometimes they hide of being Russian. They have new names, they marry somebody, they get a new name. So you cannot even, I mean, for instance, the name Maria can be a local name, can be a Russian name.
Mhm.
And if she has
Yeah.
a Italian, Austrian, German husband, it's not so easy to understand that she is actually from Russia, at least, okay, regarding her accent, maybe. And yeah, we have it. We have the concerts, we have
Mhm.
the artists. We have also the Austrian artists who collaborate. They because they believe in this idea of the great Russian culture, this
Mhm.
Russian speech, yeah, which was a very
Mm,
strong propaganda instrument for decades. Yeah, it was even during the USSR, where they
For
promoted
centuries. For
for
yeah.
centuries.
centuries.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, during the Russian Empire, where they promoted everything, also what they stole from all the other cultures in the
Hmm.
Russian Empire, and they promoted it as Russian. And this is why we have not enough empathy for countries like Ukraine, but also the situation in Kazakhstan, or if you take a look at Moldova, or if you take a look at Georgia, we see only what the security interests of Moscow are, and the great Russian culture and all their authors. And I remember that one particular situation I would like to speak about was when Khrushcheva was in Austria.
Hmm.
And I guess you know her. She calls herself a Putin critic. I can believe it or not. I think she's maybe critical of Putin. But you know what she did in all her interviews? She said, I don't like Putin, but yeah,
Yeah.
the West was so bad to him, and maybe it was also a reaction. And then about NATO, and then about the great Russian culture. And where did she make a speech? I mean, she was invited to all the Austrian media. It was terrible. Yeah, I called it the Khrushcheva Festival. But we managed to do some. Um, uh, we managed to get some people, even some professors, who wrote guest commentary that this is not okay and not accurate what she's doing.
Right.
But before there was no resistance at all. And then she was speaking by, I think it was Salzburg, the Salzburg Festival or somewhere. I don't. Yeah, I think it was that very big one, very huge audience. All the stakeholders, all the politicians and cultural elite. Yeah? And she was saying this, yeah, the Russian culture, and in Ukraine they do something against monuments. Yeah, she never mentioned what happens to Ukrainian culture on Russian occupied territory.
Yeah.
Yeah? And the
Yeah.
different circumstances, of course. Yeah? So it was really terrible. And all this artistic community, not only the Russians, also the Austrians, yeah, this classical music, opera, I hate them.
Mm,
You know what I really hate? I hate this scene, and I hate football or soccer, since what we saw last, it's all so corrupted, and so it has nothing to do with politics. Well, it is all about politics, because we need to understand that in dictatorships, sports and culture, you will not be successful if the government doesn't allow it to you, or if they don't
yeah.
support you. And we
Yeah.
see a lot of artists. Do you remember this Gagarina in 2015 who was at the Eurovision Song Contest? She was the second place, and some
Yeah.
people booed at her. And they say, oh, this poor Russian artist, she has nothing to do with the regime. And I said, no, she has everything to do with the regime, I'm sure. And what we
Yeah.
learned then in 2022, she was at this big Putin festival, and she had a set on her dress, yeah, and the St. George ribbon. So she's full part of the regime.
Yeah.
Uh,
Exactly.
yeah.
Marty, can you talk? One time we had a discussion. I remember because I was doing a report, okay, for someone, and it was about the Russian. I ran into. Well, we'll talk about pandas later, but it was about the Russian, the Red Army Choir. You remember that, Marty? Can you
Yes.
explain to everybody exactly why we should pay attention to these artists, especially through, let's say, what the Russian Red Army Choir was?
Oh, well, it takes roots, obviously, from the Soviet times. The Red Army Choir, where they're actually professional musicians, but they're technically part of the Russian military, or back in the Soviet days, they used to be a part of the Soviet military. And the tradition was kept in the 90s and in the early 2000s, and the second half of early 2000s, maybe around 2008, 2009, roughly around the time of the invasion of Georgia. They started to, or even before the invasion of Georgia, they started to use the military choirs as another soft influence tool, doing tours in neighboring countries, doing tours, extensive tours in Western countries,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
inviting Western military bands from the UK, from Germany,
Mhm.
to do musical parades in Moscow. I think I showed you the Spasskaya event, um, where
Yes.
all the different bands from Western militaries would march along with the Russian band, and it was just a bit surreal because there you have a German military band playing Radetzky March on the Red Square, something that would have been unimaginable before, but that was happening. And it was all part of the Kremlin strategy to gain that influence, to gain those connections.
Yeah.
And it just falls in line with the other strategies that were used even during the Soviet times and imperial times, because with many of those uh, literary figures, artists, and composers of the Russian Empire, like Tchaikovsky, people don't understand that many of those prominent Russian figures of culture became prominent simply because, one, they were funded by the Tsar, two, they were specifically approved by the imperial security services.
Yeah.
So they were part of the propaganda machine even back then, and now they're considered to be part of the Russian classical culture. So considering them to be something more than that, perhaps there's some merit to it, but the core of it is still Russian influence.
Yeah.
And it continues to
Exactly.
this day. But I'm
Yeah.
very happy that you brought up Khrushchev, because so many people don't understand that sometimes they can be a dichotomy. If somebody is anti-Putin, doesn't exactly necessarily translate into them being against Russia's aggression or Russia's imperial ambitions. It's very common to be both, to be anti-Putin, but to be pro-Russian imperialism. And it's happening in the Russian liberal circles, so to speak, liberal circles, and it's actually happening in the Russian far right circles, the ones who are actually fighting the war in Ukraine. If anyone is following Russian military bloggers, I think one of the prominent ones is now Gubarev. He's far right and is criticizing the Russian authorities nonstop because he wants the war to go completely differently, and criticizing the authorities for being incompetent in conducting the war.
It's not enough for him. Like the same with Girkin, yeah, Igor
Yeah.
Girkin.
Yeah, that exactly. So you
Yeah.
brought up a relevant person. So Girkin is now jailed. So the more active person on Telegram is now Gubarev, who took over that role in some respects.
Yeah. Yeah. One other thing too that just came to mind. Dietmar, you seen any operations that are involving young students in either camps or different things like that, taking them? I know that in Sochi they had the every year, right? They have the International Youth Congress that they do there, and they invite, let's say, future influencers. They're trying to wine and dine them and bring them over. Is there a recruitment effort that is going on in Austria?
Well, regarding the Sochi, there was this youth forum, and there was one journalist, and she joined from a very small media. I will not mention it because it's very,
Mhm.
very dangerous. They like to sue, or maybe for risk. And the media distanced itself. She said we have nothing to do with her trip because she was there announced as an Austrian journalist. The whole Sochi festival sphere. They would, of course, like international guests from Western Europe. And there were a couple of kids there, not famous ones. I didn't recognize anybody of them. The embassy posted something I saw, but it
Mm,
was a very big deal. But for me, it showed that there is a scene who is still connected. Yeah. And
mm,
I have to say that this media is also sponsored by the state, partly. Yeah. So by
mm,
the Viennese state, so it's really terrible. And they have these people, and they have a moderator since years. And even before the full-scale invasion, I saw that he is pro-Russian and plays with this Russian cultural propaganda. And then what we see that he even posts on Facebook that he's a friend of the Russian ambassador. Yeah, so
mm,
yeah, what should I say?
mm.
And this not only after the full-scale invasion, right now in 2025. So
Just
we have
now.
such
Mm,
people, and but the Sochi thing I was very concerned about because I saw some people that I personally know from
mm,
another context, from a European project, and I thought, what are you doing there? Yeah, so it's really we should watch all the videos and take a look, because these kind
Yeah.
of festivals they have since decades. They had it during the USSR. They had it
Yeah.
in Havana, was a big one, and they have it in the GDR and everywhere. And I remember recently there was a radio show in the Austrian radio, and there was a guy called Vladimir Wertlib. He left the Soviet Union. He fled. He's from St. Petersburg, but he is Jewish, so he had left also USSR because of the anti-Semitism there. And he explained the Homo Sovieticus and the Soviet people and their mindset, and explained why they tend to war, or why all this is possible. So the show itself, it was not so bad. But then there was one guy who called them, and he said, "I'm Austrian. I do not agree with you at all, because I was in the Soviet Union and I was in Havana at this festival, at this youth
Oh,
festival organized by the Soviets. And then you saw that these brainwash from the USSR time is still there. And every time when I speak to people who are from these countries, they say, "Yeah, I know it's because of my babushka also believes." No, no, not your babushka. My babushka here in Austria and Germany, because the peace movement, they were influenced, and the people in Eastern Europe or former Moscow occupied countries, they underestimate how much Westerners were already influenced during the Cold War via the active measures program. And now
yeah.
we should speak about it, but we don't. We still ignore it,
No.
especially in Austria.
Yeah,
Yeah. We're
and it
still.
continued, and it continued after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it went into overdrive after 2014. All of those
Hmm.
different student conferences, youth
Yep.
festivals, and the idea sometimes people think that the Russians are organizing those events to recruit agents or assets. It's not necessarily the idea. The idea is to have somebody friendly who could eventually get into positions that could be beneficial to the Russian state.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's to be there, okay,
yeah,
in on the ground,
yeah,
because that's the difference. We do not have the same presence in other countries where they have a closed information system or surveillance system. We just can't walk into Russia or China, open up a little, think tank and operate freely. It doesn't work that way. In our, we have an open society where anyone can come in, open think tanks, have their voices heard, so on and so forth. So this is why the soft power, we have to be very careful, or at least have the awareness. Okay, this is what it is. I don't want public money being used for these kind of events, right? I don't, we have to be able to identify these are the Russian narratives that they're using. This is what they're trying to do,
yes.
and that's the whole point. Okay,
Oh,
you're right, Maddie.
speaking of think tanks, the Russians also are very active in that field, and they
Yeah,
invite quite a few Western analysts into their think tanks. Uh, After a short stint there, they move to Europe or other Western countries and set up their own think tanks. And I've noticed quite a few Austrians who had a bit of a tenure in Moscow and afterwards decided to shift someplace else.
yeah.
Again, not
Any
naming any
thoughts on
names,
that, Dietmar?
but the names are known.
Yeah. No names, Dietmar.
Yeah.
No
Better not
names.
mention them. Better not mention them. They like to
No.
write you nice letters. Yeah, but of course, we know all about these. There are a couple, yeah. And what worries me also, I want to ask you, the SDGs, yeah, Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, itself, they seem a good idea. But when I was in 2019, I was at the Diplomatic Academy a lot of times. They had nice events, and I met these young students, and it was, I mean, they were very friendly, and we went out party, yeah, feeling like a teenager again. But there was a side effect. I saw that it was a little bit disgusting how they were praising these SDGs, and they had no zero awareness about authoritarian regimes. They said, "Yeah, there is an embassy. I need a job. Just use I need an internship. An authoritarian regime, it's much easier because they are not so attractive. Yeah, everybody wants to go to French or Canadian or thing, and
Yeah.
something you can get easier. Yeah, and what I also saw." SDGs, SDGs. The whole world is one big family. Yeah. And even back then, I did not believe in that, of course. And then we saw, and what I saw today, that the SDGs, there are NGOs in Austria related to the SDGs, and they are also connected to the peace NGOs. And I'm talking about umbrella organizations where all these organizations are part of. I don't want to mention their names, but you can imagine what I'm talking about. Far left and these peace movement organizations, and also Christian organizations who were part of the peace movement already during the 80s, who are very, very pro-Russian and very, very anti-Western. Yeah. So what do you think about the SDGs? Is it a psyop or is it just a coincidence that they exploited it? I mean, the idea, what makes me worried is that suddenly that everybody agreed to these SDGs. So North Korea was on the same level as, let's say, Sweden or something. Yeah? And that disturbs me. And in retrospective, I think I'm right.
Yeah. I don't know enough about them, so I don't know whether. No, I haven't done a deep dive in this at all. Matt, did you know anything about the SDGs?
Yeah, so it's generally the sustainability goals are connected to the climate change. So
Yeah.
obviously, none of us here are denying that climate change is a
No.
thing.
No, we
But
get it.
one has to understand that when an authoritarian regime, especially Russia, sees a global trend, they forget about their own values and they try to well, they have no no values of their own, but they try to understand what are the values in the West, how could we use those values against them,
Hmm.
how could we
Yeah.
exploit those values to hijack certain narratives or use them in our own advantage for economic or other strategic benefits. uh, and I agree. Some of those movements could be genuine, but they are occasionally or even fully hijacked by Russia, by China, to achieve strategic goals for Russia.
Yeah.
Uh, you've seen. I'm not going to mention Europe, but we've seen multiple protests in the United States where the local activist groups would block construction of pipelines, and those
Yeah.
pipelines were of national interest for the United States. So not just corporate profits, but also for energy security of the US. But all of a sudden, those groups would just pop out of nowhere and start protesting,
Yeah.
trying to block the development of a new oil and gas field and so on and so forth, or its construction of a new pipeline. And why does it work in Russia's interest? Because uh, the entire state, Russian state, is built around oil and gas. Uh, so if in the West they become less dependent on Russian oil and gas, I'm talking pre 2022, obviously, it creates fewer levers for the Russian state to exploit, and that's why they also hijacked the movement in Germany. So I will mention Europe with the nuclear scare. Um,
Hmm. Oh,
I
yeah.
know the Germans are not really talking about it extensively, but it should be discussed a lot more. It was in Russia's interest to ensure that the nuclear power plant would get shut down because it would leave only two other alternatives, either green energy, which is not that easy to scale, and the other alternative is natural gas. And what was the natural gas coming from? Obviously, it was coming from Russia at the time.
Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So basically, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Maddie.
so is uh, do I think that everyone is working for Russia in such movements? No, of course not. Most people who join such movements are doing it out of genuine interests and genuine value systems that they have. But it doesn't mean that they could become useful tools in the pursuit of interests of dictatorships, especially Russia.
Yeah.
So
It's
we have,
also
yeah,
it's also useful for them to get information, right, on
no,
any kind, right?
yeah,
Again, it's having that presence in different countries. It's not that everybody in every single university, I mean, university kids, they have a big heart a lot of the times, right? This is, they try to attract kids who are activists who care about the world. So they use that, they leverage that, those good feelings, those feelings of interest and caring to their own advantage. That's the only problem, and I see it, again and again and again. Especially, I mean, during, let's say, in terms of the active measures that they were executing during, the Cold War. We had the anti-nuke, okay, movement, and that was all completely infiltrated. Scientists. They had the whole scientist thing going on as well. So that's just to add to that. That's basically okay what we're saying, and we have to be careful because sometimes there are people who have real, genuine, no cares and concerns about climate change and everything that's going on. What we look at basically is to see who are the people who will try to manipulate the situation. Yeah.
Quick question. Dietmar, you brought up religion, and I immediately started thinking of the Russian Orthodox Church.
Yeah, I could have.
I don't know much about Austria, but is there an extensive presence of the Russian Orthodox Church in Austria?
No, they have a church, and unfortunately, even some people who are not Russian Orthodox go there. Yeah, so they are not isolated as they should be in the current situation. I mean, we know that Kirill is the KGB agent, because I don't say it was a KGB agent, because once a KGB agent, always a KGB agent. And yeah, the problem is also that when we speak about Ukraine and the situation with the Russian Orthodox Church there's a lot of disinformation in Austria. People think it's equals Orthodox Church, and then there's this slogan, Zelensky bans the Orthodox Church. Then you have to explain them, no, it has nothing to do with the Orthodox Church in general, and it has nothing to do
Mm,
actually with religion. It is about the Russian infiltration machine that the Russian Orthodox Church unfortunately became also already. I mean, we saw it that even during the Soviet times, it was never a non-governmental organizations. It was always connected, and also during the Russian Empire, it was part of the empire and part of their imperialism and part also connecting the so-called Ruski Mir. So, but there
mm,
is nothing really exciting going on with the
yeah.
Orthodox Church. We have more scare about, but we have the nuclear scare even worse than Germany because we
Oh,
once in the 70s, you have to imagine we built a nuclear power plant, and then after we finished it, we made a referendum if we like it, and the referendum was were against it, and so we don't have it, and of course that made us even more um, more addictive to Russian gas and the Russian gas
mm,
problems and the energy problem. And also, if it's about renewable energy, I think also the Russians work against renewable energy because it would make us also more
yeah.
independent. It's a good thing. It's a thing for the climate movement. What they would like. It's a thing what the security people would like. So what they try is to. This is something that the far right actually tries to manipulate or sabotage.
Yeah, yeah. Here it's the nuclear issue, the nuclear theme of the nukes, the actual nuclear bombs that keeps no Italians scared and divided, that kind of thing. You said Dietmar before, just a little joke, and just to introduce getting back to the Chinese, you said, well, with the Russians, you have to follow the money. With the Chinese, you got to follow the pandas, right? And I think that I checked in the Vienna Zoo, you guys have pandas, right? Do you know anything about that at all?
Yeah,
I don't want
there's
to
always.
spring something on you that.
I have to be honest. I never thought about that. That this is, but you are absolutely right. This is
Panda
this is.
diplomacy. That's
There's
exactly what it
no
is.
question where these pandas are from, and there is a lot of. I mean, China is attractive because they are very successful in the business area, economic area. We are
Mm,
very um, connected, and this is how they can. They are really a competitor against the democracies. Russia is not. Russia is not attractive. Russia has this cultural myth and the energy, but China is regarding that the system change. Yeah, I think even more dangerous. But yeah, you are right. We have the pandas, and I have to do some
mm,
research where they are from. I'm sure they are from China, of course.
yeah,
And there
we
is some
can.
connection. The Chinese ambassador, she writes, and then this is all these things to normalize, of course, the dictatorships.
Yeah, yeah. Oh no, the panda diplomacy is a thing. It goes way back, okay, into let's say in the 17th century. I think it started at that time, but probably even before then. It caught my eye, and when I was looking at because in Japan they have to give back the pandas. All right, So it caught my eye because I said, okay, that's not a good thing because when China wants its pandas back, it's not very good at all. So it means that that friendship, you know how you brought up the word friendship as well. But the Chinese, it has a very specific meaning. It's a relationship that they can count on that will let's say work in the Chinese interests. Okay, because the way that the Chinese look at their let's say the relationships abroad is that you are there to serve China. Okay, it's not the other way around. It's not an equal relationship. So when we decide to bequeath you with the pandas, it's a big deal. Okay, and it means that you're at that friendship level. You use the word friendship. Okay, and that is very specific in Chinese diplomacy and in Chinese relations. In Austria now, Dietmar, what kind of businesses? This is just let's say one of the last things, unless Marty has something else to bring up, or you do. But my last question is about now that you brought up a bit about China, are they in, let's say, the telecommunications? What are they doing there? Is it more infrastructure?
Well, Austria is not like in Greece or in Hungary or in Serbia. So the Chinese, the connections is, I mean, we are very, I'm not an expert in how much our economy is interconnected on the business level, yeah, how much
Yeah.
companies are there. Yeah. But there are some scandals here and on where we ask the questions, are we, but it's a European thing. I mean, this is something the
Mm,
European has on its feet. It's still something people talk about. But
yeah.
the cultural influence and this propaganda topic is something people don't, this is not on our radar at all. There's all these friendship associations, and you can have
Yeah.
one article about something that is happening in China, and on the next day in the same newspaper, the Chinese ambassador gives a guest commentary or an interview with all the narratives without the debunking. Yeah? And I'm very worried what would, I mean, imagine that China attacked Taiwan, what we would have regarding
Yeah.
demonizing Taiwan. And people don't know a lot about Taiwan. I would like to go there as soon as possible, as long as it's possible, because they will need people who can advocate for Taiwan and say, no, it's not true that this, they don't discriminate people from mainland China or something like that. Because I know I spoke to a sinologist, and he told me that even the mainland Chinese propaganda even says that the people in Hong Kong discriminate, not discriminate, that they are racist towards people from the mainland China. And this is absolutely absurd. This is if I would say I'm racist to somebody from Switzerland or something. There is no
Mhm.
race. So the Chinese, they use these terms that they know reflect in Western progressive terms, so they can demonize, for instance, people in Hong Kong, especially from the democracy movement. And we have, okay, well, if you ask me about business, I have one thing that comes to mind. We have
Okay.
even organization connecting stakeholders and opinion leaders and politicians or former politicians to make business with China. And the leader of this organization
Mhm.
is somebody who says there is no problem with the Uyghurs, and there is also somebody who advocates against sanctions against Russia, because it's always the same people. We need to understand that the pro-Chinese and pro-Russian people, they are very connected. And Russia and China is very connected. It's an anti-Western front. They are leading it. Iran and other countries are also part of it. And I think BRICS is very united in the propaganda war. Not in
Mhm.
everything else. Maybe they are divided. They have their issues.
Yeah.
But if it's against the West, if it's in they agree that they hate us, and they agree that they want to kill us via Instagram and TikTok. Yeah, it's case. If you have one message that is from the Chinese and from the Russians, which is and from the Iranians, which is exactly the same, don't trust Western media. Well,
Yeah.
I have to say, I don't like Western media because there are too much pro-Chinese, pro-Russian, and pro-Iranian comments in Western media or narratives. But this is not what they mean. They mean it. They
Mhm.
have different perspective in their criticism. They want,
Yeah.
of course, propaganda like we see on social media, which is 100% anti-Western. And
Yeah.
So I'm very worried about these developments, especially because we have a lot of stakeholders, former politicians, diplomats who say, "Yeah, well, we have this situation with Russia, but we should talk to the Chinese. They are very productive. They don't want this war." Blah blah blah. And I think, are you stupid or what? China mean, North Korea could not collaborate on that extent with Russia without having the blessing of China. It's impossible. I
Yeah.
guess you agree.
No, no, no. I agree 100%. I mean, we talk about them as separate countries in the sense of, okay, their operations as separate. But indeed, okay, there is some level of coordination. We've talked about this before with Maddie. We know that there are, agreements that they have on sharing information, but also intelligence and everything else. We know that without China, Russia could not continue its war in Ukraine. Full stop. All right, to keep it going. So this is we need to think of them at least, as you said, as one entity that, although internally they will probably have, let's say, areas where they don't agree, but in countering Western power, they are in agreement with that. They want to take it over. Okay, Matt, did you want to add anything to this?
No, I just had one final question. You mentioned that
Hmm.
in Austria, or potentially, we should look out for an increase in the power of the far right. When is the next election in Austria?
Mm.
The next election in Austria should be in 3 years, 3.5 years or something. I think, yeah. So, oh, yeah, good question. Good question. But if we have some, but the problem is, when you ask me when the next elections are, usually we don't have them when they are supposed to be. This is why I'm struggling. Usually,
Okay.
the government collapses, and then we have the new elections. For instance,
Okay.
Ibiza scandal with
Okay.
the fake Russian and all, and then we had new elections, and there are several other cases. Yeah. But if there would be no scandal, if there would be no crisis, then I think we have a couple of years, over 3 years, because the elections were last year.
Okay, you're looking very Italian there. Okay. In Austria. I remember with Sebastian Kurz and all of the scandal that was around him. But looking like, there are a lot of countries that are starting to look like Italian politics right about now. Actually, we are there's stability here. So I guess if there's stability here, there's a bit of instability every place else, and vice versa on that. All right. I do want to say hello before we close up. Dietmar, do you want a last word? Something you'd like to tell us? Or, uh, you know, I know that we haven't touched on how we can look at how we can deal with this, which I think is perhaps we can have a conversation about that in depth. Look at what can be done, okay, in different areas and different strategies or tactics that we can take in order to take this on in our things. But any last word, Dietmar?
To answer that question, I think it's very, very important that people like us, that we stay in touch, that we
Yeah.
advocate, that we explain what is going on, and that we find the people who also. There are people, they are not in intelligence, they are not in the think tank scene, they are just at home and they just understand what is going on. And on the other hand, you have people on the universities who are professors who have no clue, or who are even part of the propaganda. Yeah? So we
Yeah.
need to find all these gems that are around and give them some home, give them some platform, invite them, and we need to meet personally. We need to
Yeah.
online, and then we are still not as alone as we have been in 2014. Yeah. So this is
Yeah.
the only hope that
Definitely.
I have.
Definitely. Definitely. Maddie, your last words? Anything at all?
No, no, I completely agree with everything, and it's good to hear somebody who understands the duplicity of the many Russian narratives and of the many Russian actors. So it's reassuring that we have people like that in Austria. Thank you, Dietmar.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
You're welcome.
Definitely.
Let's stay in touch. It was a long time since we talked the last time. So
Yeah,
just
yeah,
give me
yeah,
a call from
yeah.
time to time.
Perfect, perfect. And my last word goes out to my mom, who is actually logged in and listening to us. So I just want to
Hello.
say hello, okay, to her and to everybody else, okay, for dropping in and listening to our convo. And again, if you have any questions or anything like that, just make sure that you pop those. into either like the Europhile chat or anything like that, we're there. Remember, on Sunday, we're going to have our next edition, right, Maddie? We're working on it. I said on the Scroods and Dudes to see who the winners and losers are for this week in geopolitics. So that'll be Sunday, okay, Sunday evening, as we've done in the past editions. Okay, everybody. So that's it for us. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Thanks for having me. Bye.